I've got a long list of questions, but the top two that I see on here are about adjudication, and I know that's point number 5. So I'm going to go to the final bullet point. These 5 bullet points are the changes that we're beginning to see coming out of the pressures on the industry and that we expect to see going forward. And so number 5 is quicker methods of dispute resolution. So what are we seeing at the moment in terms of speeding up dispute resolution, and where will it go?
I'm going to deal with where will it go first, because one contractor said to us, adjudication would sort it out overnight. But it's not just the contractor that were saying that. We actually heard from developers talking about adjudication as well. Adjudication being a swift method of dispute resolution, the idea being that you get a decision from an adjudicator within 28 days of referring a dispute. That decision is then binding. The parties have to carry out whatever the decision is there and then. But if sufficiently disgruntled with the decision, they can have the same issue heard in their usual forum for dispute resolution, be it arbitration or court later. So that is where we might end up. And I'm couching that a bit carefully because there are significant challenges to introducing adjudication into this region. Steps have been taken before, albeit they didn't come to fruition in Qatar, but I believe steps will be taken again. And part of the reason for my belief in that is that Dubai has actually set up an ideal environment for it. The DIFC, much more integrated with onshore Dubai.
So DIFC, that's Dubai International Financial Centre.
Absolutely, yeah. And the DIFC courts have got a lot of confidence now in their enforcement of their own court awards and court judgments and arbitration awards, and which has gained, so they've got a lot of confidence from the region. But they also introduced a year ago a construction and technology division to that court, and that's presided over by a former English judge. So what we've got is a specialist court that understands the concepts and the benefits of an adjudication process. So we actually now have an ideal platform to introduce adjudication into the region.
So, so you're talking about a specialist court in the DIFC, the Dubai International Financial Centre. What jurisdiction does that have in regional terms? Does that just cover the Dubai market, or is it the decisions of that court are the UAE wide, or what's the jurisdiction?
Well, in terms of who can avail themselves of those courts, it's open to anybody to opt in to DIFC as jurisdictions for the disputes to be heard. And we often do see Saudi, even Qatar and other places that have included as their forum for dispute resolution, DIFC.
Okay. And
so
adjudication is, if I can just clarify for anyone who doesn't follow this, so this is where two parties have a dispute and they bring in an outside expert, a third-party independent expert who has perhaps some technical background, or who will, within 28 days or a certain narrow time frame, give an independent judgment. And that then is a binding agreement between the two parties.
That's then a binding, that decision is then binding on them. So they must take the steps required by that decision there and then at that time, yes. But the crucial thing, and the thing that makes it more difficult to introduce it into onshore environments in this region, is that it's not final. So if really upset by the decision, you can go and have the same matter heard by your court or arbitration later. But it is worth saying that, I don't know the current statistics, but it's something like 95% of adjudications in the UK never get reopened in a court or arbitration, because it's about moving cash flow, it's about getting that something that people can live with, however rough and ready at the process, and the project moves on.
So in the UK, in the late 1990s, as I understand it, a lot of the pressures that you have described in this market were being experienced in the UK, and the whole construction industry in the UK went through a sort of change program which brought in adjudication.
Absolutely.
There. What difference did it bring to the UK construction market? I mean, is it quite was it a step change in the way things happened?
Yes, it was, and because it was a statutory right in the UK, it would mean that regardless of any contract conditions, if you had a construction contract, you can refer that to a dispute to adjudication, which meant it unlocked any cash flow problems.
Right.
And the idea was it did exactly that. It would unlock cash flow problems, enable projects to continue, and start to reduce the insolvency down the supply chain that was being achieved by these sort of paid when paid positions and money not flowing down the chain.
Okay. Now, we've got about 7 minutes left, and
Okay.
we've got a long list of questions. I'm going to rattle through them. Can either of you just step in when you think that you're the best person to ask? So this first one is about adjudication. It is from a lawyer. So how likely is it that the GCC will adopt a payment adjudication system in the next 5 years? So this kind of, you've said the change is there. What do you reckon? And it says GCC, which is obviously not a single jurisdiction, it's multiple markets, but how likely?
As I've said, we've actually got the ideal environment for it now. I think it's certainly possible within the next 5 years. I'm going to be optimistic and say perhaps at the far ends of that 5 years we might see the introduction. But I would just say we're going to see, I think, other quick methods of dispute resolution coming in before that.
What would they be?
That was your initial question,
Yes.
which I avoided at the outset. So, well, there are other ways that people are looking at finding quick methods of dispute resolution. And a great example, and one that's just at the front of my mind at the moment, is the RICS administered.
So that's the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors from the UK, but
Thank you. Yes.
represents the
So
industry.
in the Middle East, are bringing in or have a process that they administer called a conflict avoidance process. And they're doing that in conjunction with DIFC. And it's effectively going to be a method of having an issue resolved by the relevant technical expert at the time before it actually turns into a formal dispute. So I think we'll see these alternative, I'm calling them softer because they're not so formal dispute
prevention
methods,
rather than resolution.
coming in a lot sooner.
Okay.
I know the RICS are talking to interested developers at the moment about it and about incorporating it into contracts, and I hope that they'll be in a position to launch that before too long.
Colin, any thoughts on if and when we might see adjudication in the GCC?
I think it'll be towards the back end of 5 years, but I think there will be, I think there already are smaller changes coming through to try and unlock the position, because ultimately there's quite a lot of projects out there that are stuck in effectively a stalemate position, and people just want some decisions made and things to get sorted.